One cold October day back in 1889, a community in Monroe County, Kentucky, mourned the death of a newlywed young lady. The whole town was torn to pieces by her death. That is, except for two would-be no-good town pickpockets. They were not crying, rather planning. They would step up their ante from simple pickpockets and thieves to grave robbers. See, the finger of the young bride bore a ruby ring placed there by her husband only months prior. They would lie in wait for the moment to dig up their prize. But what they would discover would change their lives forever, leaving the town talking about this event for years. The men were so scared they ran away from town to never return and would change their ways, becoming prominent members of society. This story is submitted by our brother David Blair, passed down by his mother. Would you join me as we find out what happened back in 1889 and what this discovery was that would change everyone's lives forever? Appalachia, the mountains are like no other. From its rigid terrain, beautiful wildlife, to the people that live their lives here, to the strange, unexplained stories that folks share. Join me while I share this amazing place, one story at a time. It was a cold, rainy October afternoon back in 1889 in Monroe County, Kentucky. A small number of people were gathered outside the small country church. Everyone there was waiting for the preacher to return from marrying a couple in Glasgow. For some reason, it was taking a right smart of time for him to return. Benjamin Fitzgibbons and those gathered there was to mourn the passing of his beautiful wife, Ella. They had only been married a short 6 months. He had awakened one morning and found her not breathing. He alerted the neighbor and the doctor was sent for. But it was too late. She was gone. Ben was a farmer, never had much. Money was real hard to come by, but his most proud moment was when he slipped the ruby wedding ring on Ella's hand and asked her to take his last name. Everyone pondered on this while awaiting the preacher's return. Then, when someone shouted that the preacher had finally arrived, everyone filed into the church. Everyone was crying and mourning for the poor young girl. Ben was grieving harder than anyone else. All were mourning except for two, Jacob Winslow and Corey James. They only came hoping that Ben would bury his darling wife with her precious ruby ring on. The plan was they were going to the funeral and burial, pretend to leave, but instead they hid waiting for all to leave. Then they would come back and dig her up, getting that ring and reburying her. They planned to sell the ring and leave town rich. You see, for Ben, that stone wasn't much, but it wasn't small either. Things was going even better to plan. What with the preacher not getting back until 6 p.m., the delay had been a broken axle on the buggy, and it had taken that long to get transportation for the preacher to get back home. The funeral service had just ended. The two, waiting to get the ring, figured it would take about an hour to get to the cemetery, and it went just as they planned. Everyone left right after they lowered her down. The two men hid in the woods close by the cemetery. It took old Homer Jenkins what seemed half the night to fill the hole up and leave. Like two vultures, they swept in. They had torches and shovels and wasted no time in digging her up. Producing a hammer, Jacob started prying open the lid. The rain, which abated, suddenly returned with a small patter that got bigger as thunder started to rumble and lightning flashed in the skies. They had not expected a storm, and being that close to what they had come for, they finished prying open the lid. There lay Ella in her burial shroud. Both men stood there, grinning and slapping each other on the back. "See," said Jacob, "told you it's a piece of cake." "Well, let's do it. Give me the knife." "The knife?" said Corey. "So I can cut her finger off," Jacob said. "Well, I thought yous had it, Corey." Jacob, beginning to understand and trying not to lose his temper, said, "You didn't bring it with you?" "No." "Well, I thought you was bringing it." That's when Jacob lunged for Corey, and after 30 minutes of scuffling back and forth, not actually fighting, Jacob said, "Stop it, Corey. I know what to do." Hopping back down into the grave, he removed Ella's arm from the shroud, and after a second moment of hesitation, he sticks her finger in his mouth and begins to clamp down in order to get the ring off. At that moment, there was a loud clapping sound, lots of laughter, but none louder as the one from Ella, who shot straight up in her coffin. But her scream was not but a whisper compared to Jacob and Corey as they fled the cemetery horror. Ben, who had mourned for hours and praying for God to return his beloved Ella back to him, was interrupted by a slow knock at the door. And a little annoyed, he went to the door with the idea of telling them off, but in a polite way. He flung open the door, and in a flash of a bolt of lightning, saw his wife's frame in the door. Ella finally got Ben to come to, and after a bit of convincing, made him understand she was real and not a ghost. She explained to him all that happened and how Jacob and Corey, who had each bought a dozen of eggs off her the day before she blacked out, then told Ben that they dug her up and tried to steal her ring by biting it off. Ben was absolutely furious and started for his shotgun. "Now, Ben," said Ella, "don't be foolish. If it were not for them, Jacob especially, I would not be here to tell you. I would be really dead. Have a heart and have mercy on them." Seeing her wisdom, Ben agreed, and after some more convincing, decided they would not press charges either. As a reward, Ben and Ella would give Jacob and Corey the ruby ring for saving Ella, provided she let them get her a replacement. But there was a problem. The two would-be robbers was nowhere to be found. Ben and Ella lived a happy life and often thought of her resurrection from the grave. 15 years to the day, they were surprised to get a letter from Jacob and Corey. This is what it said. "Dear Miss Ella, we're mighty sorry for what we tried to do. Glad you weren't dead. But knowing our names, we had to run. But to let you know, it scared us straight that night. We have jobs now working the coal mines. Corey even got hitched. I know I speak for Corey. We pray for forgiveness. Best regards, Jacob Winslow." And with that ends this strange, miraculous story. What a story this was, beginning as a tragic tale of two innocent loves separated in death. Knowing how precious the young Ella was to the whole town because everyone mourned and cried at her funeral. But to have two scoundrels like Jacob and Corey out to make a quick buck, only to discover her in her grave, still very much alive. But if it wasn't for these two, Ella would have been buried alive and would have passed to never hear her story. Now, sometimes miracles happen and strange things that are unexplained do take place. You know, the Lord works in strange ways, and He's always in control when we think all is lost. Well, folks, I want to thank you for sitting and listening to this amazing story sent in by our brother, David Blair. Well, I appreciate you listening. I love you to pieces. And I'll see you next time.